All right, everyone. I see that there's definitely some people still joining, but just to kind of respect everyone's time, we are going to go ahead and get started. So everyone, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. The topic for today is going to be managing construction safety, compliance, and risk assessment. I will be your host, Nick Cipolla. As well here, we've got our presenter, Gary Zimmermann with eBacon. And we've also got Anthony Lavazza, Director of Operations with Lavazza Safety. All right. Just a couple house kind of cleanup items here before we start. If anyone has any questions throughout the webinar, on the right-hand toolbar, you will see the GoToMeeting drop-down for questions. I encourage everyone to go ahead and enter any questions they might have. If we have some time at the end of the webinar, we will address those questions. Also, if anyone gets signed out or has a frozen screen, please just go ahead and log off and log back in, and hopefully that will fix the issue. I'm going to go ahead and go over the agenda for today's webinar. The agenda for today is what is a construction safety program and culture, how the lack of safety program and culture affects your business, how to create a strong safety program culture in construction, how to measure your safety program and risk assessment, keys to simplifying the delivery of safety training, simple ways to manage employee safety certification and expiration dates, using electronic verification of safety training completion, and like I mentioned at the end, we will wrap up with a Q&A. I'm going to now go ahead and turn it over to Anthony.
Okay, hi, once again, my name's Anthony. I hope everyone's doing well today. We're going to talk about some exciting safety stuff today, and I hope provoke some thought and some questions. Go ahead, flip the slide. So I've always been fascinated by safety, looking at safety hazards, identifying risks, trying to figure out what's risky, and how do we make that determination between what's safe and what is risky? Go ahead and flip. So one thing I like to point out, these common everyday activities, right? Something like skydiving. We think about this a lot, right? No matter who you are, probably anywhere in the world, everybody knows what skydiving is, right? And we associate skydiving with a very risky activity. There's a lot of people that do it, but there's also a lot of people that don't do it because of the perceived risk involved. We clearly view it as a risky activity, but I've been skydiving. I'm still here. So what does that mean? Go ahead and flip. The perception is really that this is a risky activity, but you can clearly see when you look at these pictures of skydiving, that's very organized. There's many people that do it, and we very rarely hear of skydiving accidents. In fact, last year in 2023, there was only 10 fatalities, right? And I say only because there was 3.65 million jumps in the skydiving profession, right? 10 fatalities. That comes out to 0.5%. So we associate skydiving as a risky activity, but when you actually look at the data, it is really not a risky activity, right? Even though we have these perceived notions about it, because it's something that, well, let's face it, we don't have wings. We don't naturally fly. So we have to use equipment to make sure that this is a safe activity, right? And anytime we have to add stuff and use equipment or do anything to make something safe, we have to start thinking about that. And how do we do that? We use safety culture to do that, right? Go ahead and flip slides. So the value that Lavazza Safety brings to a lot of people is between all of our staff, we have decades and decades of experience. We have former compliance officers on staff, and we use team approach to ensure high efficiency for building safety culture, building out safety programs, and developing safety topics, training, and policies that you may need. We use a fractional safety approach, and that is how we identify all of the gaps in safety programs. So go ahead to the next slide. So what is safety culture, right? Safety culture refers to the collective attitudes, the beliefs, the perceptions, values that employees share, right? We combine this all into one organization. It's the sum of what people do, right? That's safety culture. It's a common word. It's a common topic. It's something we think about all the time, right? But as safety culture, what does that really mean, right? Well, it's leadership commitment. It's the leadership's priority to the safety model and the safe behaviors of the employees. It's employee involvement, right? All employees need to be involved. We have to model safety behaviors from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. It involves everyone. It's communication, open and continuous communication about safety issues, about the work, about the planning. It's learning from incidents. So when we have an incident, what do we do? And then it's continuous improvement. We are continually improving with an ongoing effort to improve our safety habits, to improve our practices. So what are some common challenges that every company faces? So some of these are a lack of leadership commitment. And the challenge is in many organizations, safety culture does not receive the necessary attention from top management. Leaders may prioritize productivity or cost-saving measures over safety. So many times, if you think of a triangle, we can put cost on one point of the triangle, we can put safety on another point of the triangle, and we can put the schedule on another point of the triangle. And if you have to pick two, you're always going to suffer in one area, right? So if you imagine that triangle, where do we find the balance? A triangle is a very stable shape. We use it in a lot of building structures, right? So how do we find the balance? So the impact that we see and something that we try to fix when we see lack of leadership commitment, we try to move that to engagement and commitment. We do that through effective communication, right? So if we have inconsistent communication, in many cases, workers are going to be confused. They're not going to know what is going on. They're going to struggle implementing new ideas or just managing work. So we start engaging the employees. We start using enhanced communication, right? Well, we also look at training. How is our training providing value to our company? Many companies like to just do, hey, here's our onboard training. You're good. This is what we do. Go ahead, head out to the field, start working. We need to combat that with providing what we call comprehensive training, right? Training never stops. And I know this is where a lot of people start thinking about that triangle, that cost and that schedule versus that safety. How are we going to add training into our schedule? Well, that's where good safety culture comes in, and that's where good safety planning, and that's where good construction planning starts coming in, because we can now start planning training into the schedule. Everyone has this notion of safety training where it has to take 8 hours, it has to be a full day, each class has to be an hour, but that's not true. Training has to be effective, and that's the most basic thing that we think about with training. So we do this comprehensive training, and if you can get these training classes, you can get all your training done in maybe a daily 6 to 15-minute talk with your employees. You've now cut down the amount of time it takes to train, and you get an effective, engaged, comprehensive training. Now that leads us into the next, the poor employee engagement, right? So imagine your employee engagement, and we'll just think about this in terms of training, right? When we have these long, robust training classes that cover everything you can imagine in safety, what happens, especially as adult learners? People start to fall off. They get tired, they fall asleep, they start getting less and less engaged, right? So then we have to give more breaks, and the training just takes longer and longer and longer, right? That happens with work, right? The less the employees are engaged, the less trust, the less ability you have for those employees to perform, the less they're engaged, right? So how do we combat that? We involve them and we empower them. We don't have to let them run around and do their own thing, right? But we want to involve them. We want to ask their opinions. Who's doing the work? The employees on the front line. They're doing the work. They can be one of your best sources of knowledge, especially when you're making assessments on how can we make things better. Walk around, ask the employees, ask what they need to do their jobs, ask what they think about what they're doing. You might find some stuff. Ask them what they're building. So empower them to speak. And then this all just comes to a head in what we call reactive safety management. And I see this a lot. In many cases, companies react to safety issues. There's an accident, we react to it. There is a near miss, we react to it. The shift there needs to go to proactive safety management. We need to make the shift into, hey, we need to identify what potentially could go wrong, what's trained to what can go wrong, and let's start getting people comfortable with doing safety first, right? I always say, be careful saying that safety is a priority, right? What happens with priorities? They change. Priorities change all the time, right? I think about this just in my personal life when I'm like, oh, should I do laundry today? No, it could wait another day, right? My priority changed just like that because there's not a need. So as we look at all these topics here, things are going good, things are going good, things are going good, and safety is a priority. If everything's going good, that priority is going to go lower and lower and lower. Safety should be an expectation. And that's how we start getting into this proactive safety management. We build this into our pre-construction plans, our daily task plans, especially for those that do pre-task planning. That stuff's kind of built in there. So we start really looking at how we're going to take these challenges that every company faces and how we're going to move them into what is considered good, safe culture. Everyone likes to throw it out, and the common example that you'll hear is, oh, it's just top-down leadership, lead by example, right? But these are actually right here: engagement and commitment, enhanced communication, comprehensive training, involvement, empowerment, and proactive safety management. These are actually the topics that we need to focus on to get good safety culture. Leadership's important, but how are we going to lead if we don't have these items? Go on to the next slide. So when we look at weak or ineffective safety cultures, we see some of these kind of statistics here, and these fluctuate a little bit, but they're roughly the same. A lot of times we'll see that we'll have 50% higher accident rates in companies with weak safety culture compared to strong, right? And some of this is just the basics, right? Just listening to your employees. We see an average of $40,000 per non-serious accident, right? These could be simple things like sprains, strains, first aids. You'd be surprised. These bills start racking up. And remember, with some of these, not everything is recordable and not everything is reportable. But that takes a lot of leadership commitment to determine, and you collect the data. Now, when we see this up to $156,259 in fines, right? I want to say that can be a little misleading, but that number right there would be the number if you had a willful violation. If you had a willful violation from an OSHA standard, right? You could potentially see that much for one violation. You could see double that for two violations, right? If it was a serious, it would be $15,625. So it cuts down drastically. You have to be careful. Willful violations It's not negligence. It's when you know there's a hazard and you tell people to do it anyways. So when we think about safety culture, those are the habits that we try to fix. I'm on the border of, I have the old school workers and I have, this new generation of workers, right? I see both sides of it. I see the get it done. This is how we used to do things. But I also see the, hey, we have all this equipment, this technology. It's 2024. We pretty much have everything you can imagine out there. And if someone hasn't built it, designed it, I'll tell you what, it's $1 million idea. I remember a few years ago with gloves. Remember when they changed all the cut levels on the gloves? You used to only be able to get a cut level glove or an impact resistant glove. Now you can get gloves that do both. So keep that in mind. You got to constantly advance. The standards don't change, but the technology changes a lot. When we see weak safety cultures, we see an 18% lower productivity rate and a 37% higher absenteeism. So that's just basic. Hey, the more you grill people, the less you empower them, you're going to start seeing productivity loss. Safety culture naturally increases morale. When people feel safe, when people are happy, they will work harder for you in a shorter amount of time. And you will see with a better safety culture, you will consistently have better performance on your job sites. And then you could potentially have long-term damage. I see this a lot with poor safety culture. This long-term damage, you have serious accidents. Hopefully this never happens, but if you have a fatality, that's going to be reported on forever. You can do a search on the public OSHA page and get a search of all of the fatalities that OSHA has investigated, I think back to 1991, right? Over 30 years that you can go search for fatalities. The information will never go away. It's on the public page. And so if people do a search for your company, they're always going to find it. Go ahead, next slide, please. So companies often struggle to develop and maintain a strong safety culture. And this is a lot of what I've been talking about, the leadership disconnect, the inconsistent practices, poor communication, and the big one is resistance to change. I like to talk about resistance to change a lot, right? That is typically the challenge that you have to overcome when it comes to safety culture. This resistance to change. We see a lot of new technology coming out. The hard hats versus the helmets right now. Oh, I like my brim on my hard hat. Well, guess what the helmet companies are doing? Putting brims on the helmets because they found that helmet technology is protecting from more hazards. So go ahead, flip to the next slide. So when we think about weak safety culture and how it affects management's ability to lead effectively, the weak safety culture starts eroding the trust in management, right? It builds that disconnect between the workers and the management. So like I said, with the strong safety culture, you're building good foundations, good morals, good morale, and companies are going to be motivated to work for you. You can do this by increasing the amount of communication. You don't have to explain everything to the workers, but if the workers understand, if they know that there's an open line of communication, they're going to talk to you. Normally I would say show of hands here, but I can only see myself talking. So think about all the times an employee is asked a question and you said, oh, I'll tell you later, or come back, or I just don't have time right now. And think in your heads right now, would it be better if I took 15 minutes to go over this job task, to explain how to do this type of work, explain what I want, or would it be better if we spent 8 hours at the clinic because there was an accident, right? I'd much rather pay 15 minutes every day, all day long, than 8 hours of my time, right? So think about that. When these questions are being asked, even if you understand it, the questions are being asked because they don't understand it. So just starting to build that communication will start to naturally build that trust. The more you can explain and the more confident your employees are that you're going to answer their questions. Go ahead and next slide. So how do we measure this through the safety culture? We look at a lot of key performance indicators, mostly employee engagement, right? How engaged are the employees? Are the employees wearing their stuff? Are they making corrections, or do you have to constantly go out there and do the corrections? We do post-incident reviews on near misses, root cause analysis. We look at the injury rates, and we look at safety training completion rates. Safety training completion rates are a big one. So all that stuff can help. Help to measure what your safety culture is. If you have low percentages, you probably have a poor safety culture, even if you think you have a good one. So start looking at these performance indicators. Look at your completion rates. Go ahead, next slide. So there are some steps for creating and improving a safety culture. And these are things that we help with as Lavazza Safety. We provide the fractional services team augmentation. So we assess the gaps and we try and fill in those gaps. If you don't have a safety team, we provide a safety team. We do inspections, policies, procedures, safety training, and then we develop and represent our partners for any sort of compliance needs. Go ahead and next slide. So how are we integrating safety culture into your company's risk assessment process? I think this is where I'm going to hand it over to Gary now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anthony. I think we've got just one last quote here from Benjamin Franklin.
Oh yeah, one last quote from Benjamin Franklin, right? I like this one. Safety kind of sprung out of fire prevention, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of care. Benjamin Franklin, he said that in the 1700s, I think, let's see, look at notes here, 1735, right? And this was advising the the Philadelphians on good fire safety. Fire's always been a problem for humans, right? We are not resistant to fire, if you can imagine that. So fire safety, it started there, it's always going to go back to there, but now we've included all of these other topics. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony. All right, turning it over to Gary. So Gary, best practices for assigning and tracking training.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Anthony, very much. We really started to talk right at the end of Anthony's presentation there about measuring and key performance indicators, things like that. So that's kind of my half. I do development here at eBacon. And so one of the best practices that we have found is to provide someone in the back office with a single software platform if possible. We're going to be talking about a couple of different tools that you can use to manage your learning and measure it. And you could do them separately, but as you found out with a lot of your other back office processes, if you've got too many tools and too many spreadsheets and too many apps and things like that, things start to get confused. So if you can get them all in one single platform, that's usually best. As an example, Nick, yeah. This is a snapshot. It's a little bit busy because it shows everything that happens to be on the eBacon platform, but this is a snapshot of a dashboard, and there are two things that are circled in red towards the bottom right there. One of them is about trainings, and the other is about certifications. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about those things, but I wanted to just show you that within all the other things that you can do in the back office, whether it be payroll or time off or benefits or 401k, the training and the certification is all there in the single platform.
All right, Gary, so how to use an electronic learning management system to administer trainings?
Sure, so some of you may not be familiar with the term LMS or learning management systems, but they are out there. They could be part of like I said, an integrated platform, or they could be out there on their own. Generally speaking, the larger the company, the more likely it is that you're using a learning management system, and they can get to be very, very large, very, very cumbersome, you know, built for companies of an enterprise scale. and then there's others that are built for much smaller companies. So in a nutshell, an LMS is something that allows you to create content, deliver that content, and then to Anthony's point, report on that content. Who's taking it? How are they doing on it? When is the last time they did it? Those kind of measurements. And then the one thing that we want to be sure to do is to make sure that it's easy to administer, especially in our industry. Generally speaking, unless you have those very large businesses, you probably don't have someone whose entire job it is to do the training. So chances are it's the same person who might be running payroll or doing a bunch of other back office tasks. So that LMS platform has to be easy to use. And then a couple of bullet points on how to use it effectively. Number one, we want to remove barriers for participation for the users, the learners. Oftentimes there are gamification strategies depending on how skilled the person is who's developing the content. The games could be very gamish, like a golf game or a different kind of sports game, or there's sort of a game within so that you would get different prizes or different levels as you take different trainings. Those aren't necessarily they aren't required, but it is something that as the workforce gets younger and younger, a lot of people are using. We want to make it easy to track progress. We also want to incorporate varied media content, so we know that people learn differently. Some people are they would rather read, some are okay with the PowerPoint slides, some would rather see a video. It's good to be able to put any or all of that in a learning management system. It's also good to break it up into smaller chunks. I think Anthony talked about that, about doing things in small pieces as opposed to it has to be an 8-hour class. One of the things that if you're using your LMS, you can put in prerequisites. So if you do have smaller chunks about, say, one topic, they would have to take them in a certain order. You'd have to finish the first version of that first piece before you can move on to the second, so that people can go ahead and jump ahead and perhaps go into things that they don't understand yet. And then you also want to be able to personalize it based on their role. So depending on what their role is at the company, there might be something about forklift training for the warehouse. Certainly the guys that are out on the job site don't need the forklift training for the warehouse. You have to be able to divide those up and assign them out so that they're appropriate to the right audiences.
All right, Gary, so what are some keys to simplifying the delivery of safety trainings?
Yeah, so first is to assign them with due dates. So rather than just putting them out there and having them be out there in the ether and they can finish it whenever they want, go ahead and assign it with the due date. And again, the way that we do it here at eBacon is that once a training is assigned to someone, they receive an email that not only tells them the date that it's due, but also provides a link to that training to make it very easy to jump right to it. You saw the dashboard a couple slides ago. Certainly they could access it by the dashboard, but easier than that is just to click on the link in the email. And then to be able to monitor the progress of those training. Again, this is where the one single platform comes in handy, where you can see it all in one place, who's taking it, when they're taking it, how they're doing on it. It even can move right into their employee file. So right along with the same information about their pay rate and their days off, their training is right there. This is just a quick snapshot of one of the things that was circled on that first slide. And this just shows what someone would be able to see as far as these trainings are assigned to me. In this case, there's a safety one from the American Heart Association with basic life support, perhaps a harassment training that's mandatory, an active shooter training, and then maybe one that you designed yourself. Maybe those first three are ones that you pulled in from another source and put them in your learning management system. That last one is one that perhaps you built on your own. You assign them with the due date, and the employee can see that they're due right there on their dashboard.
All right, Gary, so how to use electronic verification of safety training completion? Yeah,
I want to be aware of our time, so if you want to fill up this whole slide. The second thing that we saw circled on that dashboard, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just a simple thing for people to see what's assigned to them. You can also see on the right-hand side of your screen, it shows what's in progress. It shows what's completed, so someone can always go back and review what they had. Maybe they forgot something, they passed a course, but they're not sure they remember. They can go back and see they're completed, and they also can see available. So these might not be assigned to me, but I can still see them if the company has made it available to me. So someone working in the office might have a reason to go and look at that warehouse forklift training. It's available to them, but was not assigned to them.
All right, Gary, so just some simple ways to manage employee safety certification and expiration dates.
Yeah, so this is the one I was referring to. It was the second thing that was circled on the dashboard. A little bit sort of a sub version of the learning management system. This would be something where you could actually create certifications. So let's say Anthony worked with you on coming up with a safety certification for your company, and it was good for a year, it was good for 2 years, whatever the case may be. Those could also be stored in a single platform so that someone could see when it was that they completed it and when it expires. So it's a little bit more reactive than the learning management system. You could even put things in a certification like this, even something as simple as a driver's license, so that 90 days before your driver's license expired, the certification module would tell you that it's coming up to due. 60 days, it might tell your supervisor that your driver's license is coming up to due. 30 days, it might tell the owner of the company. Anything that you want to keep track of that has an end date to it.
All right, well, Gary and Anthony, thank you so much for that. That was very informative. We do have a couple questions. I know that we are a minute over our time, but if anyone needs to jump off, go ahead and do so now. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up these 2 questions. I've got a couple of questions here. I think these are gonna be a little more geared toward Anthony. So Anthony, we've got a couple of questions from Gary here. So what type of accident would cause a fine that high?
Sorry, one more time, you're cutting out a little bit.
I'm sorry. So the question was, what would cause a fine to be so high? On that first slide, it was about $156,000.
Yeah, so a fine to get that high, to get into the willful region, that is when someone that is considered management, and what we as companies consider management might not be what OSHA or ADOSH here in Arizona considers management, right? Anyone that has a say-so in the work, so that could be a team leader on up, can be considered management under OSHA, right? So if you recognize a hazard and you allow the work to happen, you're now in the willful range. And willful, there's a lot of work that goes into proving willfulness, but if that's proven, many times those willful violations get upheld, and they can be crushing. Most violations within OSHA are tried civilly. Willfuls are the only ones that can be tried criminally. So something to keep in the back of your head. You start making these decisions when you know there's a hazard, you could spend time in prison.
Wow. Gary had a second question. He asked, what state are you located in?
So I'm in Arizona. We've started kind of branching out to Nevada and Texas as well, and we kind of will help nationally. I'm a former compliance officer out of New York, so I've done safety work all over the U.S. and all over the world.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, those were the only 2 questions we had here. So, this is kind of a little bit of background on Lavazza Safety. I'm just going to kind of leave the screen open for a second. I know that we are over our allotted time here. And then, what does eBacon provide construction and service companies? We automate contracting, automating payroll, automating employee management like PTO approval, expense reimbursements, employee onboarding, providing expert HR guidance, and integrating labor expenses into accounting systems like job costing reporting. If everyone will be receiving an email after this webinar. There will be a link in that email that will allow you to schedule any time with us at eBacon as well as Anthony at Lavazza. So if there's any further questions or you'd like to kind of take a deeper dive into Lavazza Safety, please go ahead and follow the prompts in that email. to kind of give you guys a little taste of our next webinar on October 10th, we are going to be talking about unlocking government contracts, secret to outbidding competitors. I just want to thank everyone for their time today. Anthony and Gary, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.